But what does this really say about Russia's growing influence around the world? I mean, you say that Russia is trying to reclaim lost glory, but Russia is already a world power, so it doesn't really affect its influence, does it?
I think we're talking in relative terms here. We are talking about Russia that was really essentially in the past, the Soviet Union. Then we spoke about two superpowers. We don't talk about that again. We now talk about unipolarity, in which we are talking about the American hegemon. So to that extent, Russia sees herself more or less as a glorified, defeated power. So this latest move is a kind of move on her part to reclaim that preeminence which she had.
And let's look at the reactions now by the US, the EU, and some of their allies in position of sanctions. The US, of course, has already announced visa restrictions, travel restrictions, and so on some Russian officials and those in Ukraine that were behind the referendum and so on. And already Russia's been kicked out of the G8. Would this have any effect on the country?
Let's look at the whole issue of sanctions generally. Sanctions, sometimes they are just gestures. Gestures designed to show displeasure, and then you move on. Let's bring the discussion around home again. Under Abacha, there were sanctions and the like. But what happened? Abacha still remained in force. The potency of sanctions, anyway, will also depend on whether the targeted country can get alternatives. And we're going to see in the coming months, in the coming years, whether Russia can avail itself of alternatives. But remember, too, some sanctions also cut both ways. And that is that even those wielding sanctions are going to be hurt, too. How are you sure that one of them will not also break ranks? And this is why I think Russia is in a very, very strong position. She knows that these countries will not use force on her, that they will just resort to sanctions. South Africa for several years was under sanctions. The former Rhodesia, too. At the end of the day, well, the sanctions really work. I mean, so there's that argument in international relations that sanctions don't even work. It's just a way of showing your displeasure. And if the Russian political elite, if the members are sufficiently pragmatic, flexible, and imaginative, they will beat those sanctions. Let's be very, very careful there, please. International law is a very, very malleable concept because some people even will tell you, which sounds probably outlandish, that international law is not law, because they will say that if you are talking of law, you must have the enforcement mechanisms. And in any case, we have to remember that the international system is really one of competing sovereign units. So to that extent, international law exists as long as a state decides to obey international law. There are several instances in which all those calling Russia to order now, they were, in fact, also those who broke international law, habitual breakers of international law. So at this point in time, they are ready to kind of show up Russia as the culprit, so to say. So whether she has broken international law or not, I think we have to allow the international jurists to decide that. But remember, in international relations, sometimes might is right.
What are the lessons here? Because there's some who are looking at what's happened in Crimea. They're saying, you know, there are groups like that in Nigeria that are planning to succeed, are planning to stand on their own. They could say, okay, this is happening in the developed world. I mean, it could more or less happen here.
Well, as much as possible, we should be careful about comparisons. And that is that the fact that it has happened in Russia does not mean it's going to happen here. As I sit here, I'm thinking of something, and that is that right across the border there, you have Yorubas in the Republic of Benin. Are we then going to say that Nigeria should invade that country because there are Yorubas there? I don't think so. Because
the Bakassi issue? I think that's a really
there's also the Bakassi issue too. But luckily that has been settled for us by the so-called international law. And to that extent, everyone is at peace now, so to say. But like you said, what has occurred there has the capacity to reverberate around the world, including this place. But I don't think it's going to happen here.
Well, finally, would you say that Ukraine and Russia have handled this crisis well?
Ukraine itself was a kind of pawn in the chessboard of the powers, i.e., Russia on one hand, the United States on the other, and of course, European Union. So to that extent, I can ascribe some form of passive posture to Ukraine on this particular issue. The real active players, okay, were Russia on one hand, the US on the other, and of course the European Union. Whether it was, well, I can say that it has ended well, if only because we have not had any recourse to a shooting war between and among these powers, because that was a possibility too. That would be very, very dangerous and very interesting too, because I don't think a military action would be worth her while, if only because if she keeps going into one form of military offensive or the other, Iraq yesterday, Afghanistan last week, and now she wants to go into Russia. She wants to go into war with Russia. That would be very severe for all of us, because we are talking of countries which have absolute weapons. I don't think it is worthwhile.
Professor, thank you so much for speaking with us.
You're welcome, Damarachi Ubani.
When we come back after the break, international efforts continues for the missing Malaysian flight MH370. To join us again.
Fun, inspiration, and knowledge. That's what you get from readers, writers, publishers, and the entire book world. Get some interesting reviews, events, interviews, and latest updates from the book world. The channel's book club, inspiring you one page at a time.
Welcome back to the program. It's been a little over 2 weeks since Malaysian flight MH370 just went off the radar at the control tower in Kuala Lumpur. The plane was on its way to the Chinese capital, Beijing, when after being airborne more than 4 hours, it simply disappeared. 239 people were on board that plane, and Malaysian authorities believe it was deliberately taken off course. Since the middle of last week, the search has been in 2 distinct corridors, one stretching to the northwest of the last known location in the Malacca Straits and one to the southwest. Rescuers are now working with leads from satellite images believed to be debris from the missing plane, but even that has proven inconclusive.